Alright, YouTube, time for Occult Video 45, specifically on the topic of prophecy. Uh, Prophecies are generally alluded to by those that are not just spiritual, but religious. Within a religious context, they're used sometimes retroactively to apply to actual past events or to events that are something that somebody knows is going to happen, in order to buff up the faith of the religious amongst them. That is, somebody, for instance, within a religion would say, such and such is going to happen, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. They'll predict something that they know is likely. If they're smart, they'll predict something that they know is going to happen, or they'll shroud it in vague terminology, like Nostradamus did with his quatrains, so that it can apply to many different events. If you use symbolism within prophecy, as Nostradamus did, your predictions will be seen generally as fairly accurate, because there's no way in the span of time that something is not going to happen that will generally fulfill, and sometimes it's a bit of a logical stretch on behalf of those that believe in such a prophecy. Now, I do believe that if quantum physics is, in its theoretical sense, is real, if there are multi-dimensional systems at work here, perhaps it's possible to see glimpses of things that are to come. But I don't believe in determinism. I don't believe that the future is fixed. I believe that it is not random, but it's fractal, you could say. That is, there are multiple possibilities for the future. They're ever changing. I don't believe that there is one fated course of humanity through all the cosmos, because I don't believe that there was any specific beginning of existence. That is, even if we assume that there's no big crunch after the Big Bang, or that the Big Bang is a singular event, that is, it doesn't replicate itself in any manner, and there's only one universe and so forth. Even then, before that, there was something there. We just don't quite comprehend exactly how it happened that the Big Bang came to be. Because determinism, to my mind, is not true. I flirted with determinism for a while. I said, well, it kind of makes sense. Then I looked deeper into science, and I said, ultimately, it doesn't make sense. There's no reason to believe that there's any limit to the universe or to the multiverse system, which I happen to believe in. That is, if you were to go beyond the edge of what we see as the observable universe, you wouldn't simply hit a brick wall beyond which there's no existence at all. There would be existence there. It might be a blank black void for, many quadrillions of miles or something like that, but there's other stuff out there. There would have been potentially other Big Bangs. Whatever led to the Big Bang as we see it has been replicated elsewhere at different points in time. That is, there was no beginning of existence. There was a beginning of the universe, but there was no beginning of existence itself. So determinism, to my mind, in such an infinite system, as far as space and time both go, is a lie. It doesn't. You have to limit things quite a bit in order to get a deterministic system. As such, I don't believe that it's possible to necessarily see you see some future event from 20 years from now, and you say, oh, I got a glimpse of the future, and you write it down and it comes true or something. I wouldn't call that really prophecy. I would be saying you're connecting with some sort of like weird fourth dimensional source or something like that. Somehow you have managed to do that, if indeed it's fully accurate. If you're talking about Nostradamus style predictions, you're talking about guesswork, educated guesswork maybe. And in other cases where you have prophecy, you would look at some of the biblical content. What you're looking at is a prophetic, retroactive description of things that have already come to pass. That is, you are retroactively commenting on something that is happening now or has already happened, and framing it as though somebody from the past prophesied it, sometimes to impart a moral lesson or something. Does that mean that I don't believe that there are things potentially like ESP and other phenomena that we can't describe and we can't explain? I do believe that that's the case. I think there are very many phenomena that sometimes they happen very, very rarely, so we don't really get a chance to describe them or contemplate them and how they might work. Or they're too out there as far as science goes with its current technology, and we simply can't really adequately describe how they work. It works somehow, we just don't know how the fuck it works. I believe in such things. But as to prophecy itself, that is specifically as we would generally regard it, as predicting certain future events, I don't have a big belief in it. Now, we also have to differentiate, I believe, a little bit between the religious context and the strictly spiritual context, as well as the more scientific context. If we're talking in the context of science, or pseudoscience, or something like that, what we are regarding is some sort of phenomena that leads the person to get a glimpse in some manner of something that may happen. Sometimes it's more of a loose interpretation or their interpretation of something they've seen. Sometimes it's more definitive. It's more certain. It's more tangible. If we're talking about science, we're really not talking about some mystical mumbo-jumbo where a god has said, well, this person is my chosen elect, they must reveal to the world this future event. What purpose it would serve, we don't quite know in most cases. But we're not talking about anything specifically spiritual. If we look at the spiritual context, if we don't regard those that deal with moral lessons and they're retroactive, or in other words, their descriptions of current events as though they were future events from a perspective from the past. Again, biblical commentary often does this. You get some writing from 200 AD that talks about some prophecy that was made 400 years ago and how accurate it was because these things are happening today. Well, you're doing that retroactively. It's not an actual prophecy. You're just describing it as though it was. It's fiction. It's a piece of fictional writing, perhaps religiously inspired fictional writing, but fictional writing nonetheless. In the spiritual context, it would be a bit different. We can still regard forces as yet not quite adequately described. We're not necessarily attributing them to a specific god or a specific named, described cosmic force. Within a religious context, though, we're talking about a specific deity, a specific cosmic force, a specific angelic intermediator, or something like that, has somehow inspired a specific human being for a specific reason to reveal a specific future thing that's going to happen. I'm not a believer in this, because the very underlying basis of these religions invariably is faith, and faith is not very good. Faith is essentially, don't question it, just go with the flow. You were raised up in this religion, so it must be right, in other words. Your specific conception of God at this point in time, which is often markedly different from that same religion's denoting of that same deity 100 or 200 years ago, is obviously flawless. Everybody else has had it wrong. It's not like within a spiritual context, you're not necessarily naming a specific entity or a specific force. You're simply saying, well, I've gotten a glimpse of something weird. I had a dream that my neighbor's house burned down. A week later, their house burned down. You're not saying necessarily, well, Jesus gave you that inspiration. Muhammad gave you that inspiration. Buddha came to you in your sleep and let you, so that you weren't in your neighbor's house at the time that it burned down because you're under divine protection of some sort. You don't even necessarily ascribe a purpose to it. In a religious context, is generally what happens. It was given for a specific religious purpose, or to protect a person, or to destroy a person, or something, or to change a nation, to change, to overthrow the tyrannical, to liberate the people of this horrible monarch from like the medieval era that kept stealing their turnips or something. This is the more religious concept. It's often political, it's often social, it's not necessarily ascribed directly to them, but it appears within a social context. That is, the types of predictions you're going to see in literature ascribed to things, they differ from time period to time period. You look at Mexico, a great example, with the Virgin of Guadalupe or whatever. People see divine visions or get prophetic visions or weird dreams or something. It's in the context of colonialism. It's in the context of the perceived loss of a native culture, in which there arises a greater culture under Catholicism. And so naturally, they start seeing all these weird spiritual things that they never saw before, and they call them divine, and they feel closer to that overarching culture that they're now part of. It's an attempt to normalize their situation, essentially. It's a very social thing. It belongs squarely within the realm of anthropology. Whereas when you're talking about the spiritual, it could belong within the realm of metaphysics more appropriately. And when you're talking about some completely, ultimately mundane, just not quite described scientific principle behind how a person might get a clue as to what's going to happen. It might be ESP or whatever it happens to be. You're not talking even about the spiritual. You're talking about some sort of physical, scientific force that simply hasn't been described yet. Three totally different things. So as far as religious prophecy goes, often you have to look at the social context. You have to look at whether these prophecies made, like Nostradamus, are exceptionally vague or whether they're more specific. You have to look at the social context. You have to look at the religious context as well. With spiritual prophecy, you don't necessarily have to look at what specific divine force may or may not have influenced such a prophecy, but you have to keep spiritual systems in mind in some way, or otherwise you go down to the next level, which is just the scientific. You're saying you have had a dream that seems to you to be prophetic. You don't attach a god to it or necessarily any cosmic influence or any divine or even significant purpose behind it. You're simply saying, somehow I got a glimpse of the future. In any case, though, I tend to distrust anyone who says, well, I had this dream, I had this vision, I had whatever. I'm going to tend to be skeptical of their claim if they say that they somehow saw a glimpse of the future. It doesn't matter, even if they say, well, yeah, I dreamed that my house burned down and it burned down the next day. I'm still going to be skeptical of it simply because of random chance or seemingly random chance, because of coincidence. We have to be skeptics, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need to completely disbelieve the very concept can exist, because there are stranger things certainly in the scientific world that we can dream up that are perhaps real that we can't quite describe and that right now are in the realm of pseudoscience. So that's just a bit about prophecy, Occult Video 45. Hope you enjoyed that. That's about all. Peace out.